Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so glad you've joined me this evening for part 2 of our story. So let's continue with part 2 of our story. For indeed, Marta intended to celebrate if she got the sale, and her very strict diet would go down the plug hole, for she intended to treat herself to 3 very fattening doughnuts, and the more calorific, the better. So what if she couldn't get the buttons up on her pants the very next day? That was a small price to pay, if she could pull this off. She needed a sale so badly, and this couple was so close to signing on the dotted line, so close. What she did next would ultimately determine whether these clans would be persuaded to buy the cliff house or not. She had to choose her words very carefully, as if she was stepping on a field of landmines. If she didn't proceed with undue caution, her dreams of a sale would go up in a whisper of smoke. 2 insatiably hungry pairs of eyes were staring at Marta, as if she was a mother eagle bringing some juicy morsels of meat to her eaglets in their nest. She could see the hope in their eyes, but also the expectation that there was indeed a catch or a snag to buying this place. The Andersons were waiting for the disappointment, like unexpectedly discovering the pip in a pitted olive that very nearly cracked a tooth, only a whole lot worse than that, of course. But the question was, what was the catch in buying the cliff house? There had to be one. And as Leonora waited for Marta to speak and to spill the beans, never before had she been so apprehensive to hear what an estate agent would say to her. So she braced herself for impact, as if Marta's words were like an aeroplane about to hit the ground with a violent crash. She closed her eyes tightly as Marta finally spoke. Marta straightened her back, formally. She brushed a few white flecks away from her pleated black pants, and then she looked squarely at Malachi Anderson in the face. It was no use looking at Leonora. Her eyes appeared to be squeezed tightly shut. Marta's eyes were hidden behind a pair of designer dark glasses. She had an excuse to be wearing them, as the sun was cascading magnanimously on her shoulders, causing her to squint, so she needed to be wearing them. It depends what you mean by haunted. Is the house haunted? Absolutely not. Is the cliff haunted? More than likely, I suspect. If you believe in that kind of thing, of course. Let's not kid. Many a shipwreck occurred over here over the centuries. Many a life was lost out at sea. Lots of people have lost their lives on that stretch of coastline. So if you believe that energy lives on after we die, then maybe the coastline here is haunted. People certainly claim to have seen things here, like a ghost ship, but that's about as haunted as it gets. Leonora breathed out her breath that she had been holding. Well, that's quite the relief, she said, looking at Marta. I can handle a ghost ship or 2, and even a few ghostly spectres that have lost their lives at sea. As long as they don't trespass across the threshold of the house, I'm fine by that, she said, suppressing a laugh. There is just one thing that I failed to mention, said Marta. Leonora's heart, that was beginning to skip again, suddenly began to boom rather violently. This was it. This is what Marta was going to tell her. This was the deal-breaker that was going to thwart them from buying the cliff house. Please God, may it be something that they could actually live with, because she so wanted this place. She was secretly hoping that the house had some plumbing issues that they needed to address. She could easily live with that, even though for Ivy Cottage the very same problem would have been an absolute deal-breaker and a non-starter. But you could make allowances for a spectacular house like this that you really wanted. You could stretch the elastic band of what was normal to be acceptable in a house sale. Leonora had already started envisaging drinking her coffee on the limestone patio every morning, staring out at the exquisite ocean-front views. Once again, the Andersons fixed their gaze on Marta, both of them staring at her moving lips, as if they were both hard of hearing and needed to read them. They were almost afraid of her words, for they knew what she said next would be the difference between buying or not buying the Cliff House. It would seem both Malachi and Leonora both wanted this house more than they wanted anything else in the world. It was much like that when they met each other for the very first time. Love at first sight. This house would be hard to turn away. "Come with me," said Marta. "I need to show you both something." They followed Marta. She was walking towards the edge of the cliff, but she didn't get too close. "I need you both to appreciate just how sheer and dangerous this cliff actually is when you get close to the edge. I hope you don't suffer from heights, because when you look down, it is quite a drop." The couple instinctively stepped away from the edge of the cliff, knowing that if they got too close, they could potentially fall to their deaths. It was certainly a steep drop. Marta took in a deep breath and then sighed. "I'm afraid this is known as the drop. It's very well known as a spot for people to come and commit suicide. Let's just say every year there are over a dozen people who walk down from the beach, climb up the staircase to get to the top of the cliff, and then they throw themselves off the cliff. It's very tragic, of course, but many of these poor souls are very broken people. The residents who live at the Cliff House have been eyewitness to some of these harrowing events. Not all, of course, but enough. Some of them feel traumatized. They feel they can't possibly continue to live at the Cliff House. So this property has been passed around from one homeowner to the next, rather like an unfortunate game of pass the parcel, which has meant property developers don't want to touch this piece of land with a barge pole, even though it's a prime piece of real estate. The ominous unfavourable reputation of this inauspicious cliff means they won't be able to make big bucks out of any development that they would build here. So the people living at the Cliff House have to call the police when they see someone is about to attempt suicide. But I'm afraid it's often far too late for the police to stop the suicide. They tend to put up crime scene tape. The body is taken away in a coroner's van. Recently the suicide rates have increased exponentially. Life is a lot harder these days for so many. You see, so the recent owners of the Cliff House just couldn't take it anymore. She said it just got too much for her, which is why she's put the Cliff House up for sale. And it's why I've brought you here." "So what you're telling me, Marta, is that this cliff is actually a suicide spot?" asked Leonora, staring down at the cliff ominously. This was not what she was expecting to hear. It had been the last thought on her mind, and the estate agent's revelations shook her to the core. For a moment she studied Malachi's somewhat discomposed expression. She noticed her husband's face had gone completely white, but Marta's expression remained composed, as if she had told this tragic tale too many times to count, and was well used to it. Leonora thought she could handle the dreadful reality that people had tragically lost their lives over those treacherous rocks over the centuries, but the thought of people climbing up the iron steps embedded in the cliff in order to get to the top of the cliff so that they could ultimately throw themselves down onto the rocks below to take their lives. Could she live with that? She wasn't sure, but she so wanted this house. She was actually weighing the pros and cons over in her mind. Marta explained, "If someone throws themselves off this cliff, it is an instantaneous death. There is no way they can survive that fall. And at high tide the ocean can be incredibly angry. Sometimes bodies are swept away. I believe some people who committed suicide here may never be found, because to the outside world they've simply disappeared, lightly swept away by the ocean. I have to be honest with you, and you're going to ask, so I'm going to tell you. The reason people sell this house, and why it doesn't demand a huge price tag, is people don't want to experience this on their front doorstep. Most people, much like yourselves, when they come here, they fall passionately in love with the Cliff House. But usually when you mention the suicides, they lose interest in a sale very, very fast." "I see," said Leonora, pondering what she'd been told. She tried to decide whether she could live with something like this or not, and then she looked up at her husband Malachi. "Do you know what? If we see anyone out there on the cliff, intending to jump, Malachi, you are the perfect person to go and talk to them, to persuade them not to do something like that. If anyone could talk someone out of committing suicide, it's you, my love. You're very persuasive. Marty looked rather doubtful. She could see Malachi was a very nice man indeed. Exceptionally so. But was it not only experienced officers that could talk people out of killing themselves? People who had been trained for the job. "We're going to take this place," said Leonora. "I want these spectacular ocean views, and the convenient access to the beach, without having to leave our home. If we live here, people might succeed in committing suicide, and yes, it is so tragic. But if my husband can help save a life or two, that is a promising start. And I simply don't want to turn this fabulous place away. An opportunity like this to live in a house in such a prime position that otherwise we could never afford. If we don't buy this place, I know I will be tossing and turning in my bed for months on end, saying, why didn't we buy it? At least try living here. See what it's like. Some things are meant to be, and buying this place feels right. And I know you think I'm rather ridiculous talking about my husband like this, Marta, but I want to assure you there is no one who is more likely to talk someone out of committing suicide than Malachi here." "Hold your horses," said Marta. "Don't get too eager. You haven't seen the inside of the cliff house yet. Surely you need to look at the interior to see whether it's suitable for your needs. What if you don't like the kitchen? In my experience, when people don't like the kitchen, it's a no sale for me." "A kitchen can be gutted, Marta, and changed, but a view you're stuck with," said Leonora. "We are buying this place based on the views, not based on whether there is a kitchen that works or not. That is inconsequential, because that can easily be changed." "Well, what do you think about this, Malachi? Are you happy with buying the cliff house, or do you need to think about it?" asked Marta. "You heard the wife. What the wife wants, the wife gets. She's very determined to get the cliff house. And I'm very happy to talk someone out of committing suicide if I can. It will be a self-satisfying role. I enjoy helping people when I get a chance to do so. So yes, I'm quite happy to buy this place." Marta wanted to run over to Leonora and throw her arms around the woman. Maybe there was a God after all. She was going to crack a huge sail today, and that cruise in the Caribbean looked like a very big possibility in the not-too-distant future. She knew her next port of call would be the local coffee shop, along with 3 to 4 wickedly delicious doughnuts that she would eat in one sitting without any qualms. A celebration was certainly in order. 6 months later, the Andersons had settled very happily into the cliff house, and Leonora had sat down her 2 teenagers before they made the big move to tell them about the house they'd bought. "It's on top of a cliff, with exquisite views over the ocean. You're going to absolutely love it. We were spellbound by the place. At low tide you can go down the iron steps in the cliff to the cobbly beach below. There are quite a lot of rocks there. And you take a little walk further along and you'll meet a pristine beach, where members of the public enjoy the beach for picnics and walks. So literally, the beach is a walk away from the house." "Cool," Chester had said. "That sounds amazing. We don't have to get into a car on a bicycle to ride to the beach. That's brill." "You mean the house you bought is on top of a cliff?" asked her daughter Hannah incredulously. "Don't you have to be a multi-millionaire to buy a house like that?" "Not exactly," Leonora had said soberly. "There was a specific reason the house was so cheap. We were incredibly lucky to buy it at that price. But it's for these reasons that I need to discuss the property with you. There are a few things I need to warn you about that you might find quite unsettling." "Oh my God! It's a haunted house!" said Anna excitedly. "That is just so super cool. I went on a ghost tour once to visit a site. Oh, my word, all these reputed haunted places we went to." She pulled a sad face. "But we saw nothing. It was so disappointing. But to live in a haunted house, that is cool." "As far as I know, Hannah dear, the cliff house itself is not haunted, which I'm very glad about personally, because then I might have had misgivings about buying the cliff house. The estate agent did claim that over the years people have seen sightings of a ghost ship on that stretch of ocean that is believed to have been shipwrecked. You see, we're moving to an old location where a lighthouse once stood. Many ships were wrecked on that stretch of coastline, I'm afraid to say. Many a soul's life was lost out at sea. The ocean has been a watery grave for many over the centuries, as you well know, like all the lost souls that tragically died in the Titanic." "A ghost ship," said Hannah. "That's even better than a ghost, Mum. Do you think I'll see the ghost ship?" Leonora looked highly doubtful, but she gave her daughter a watery smile. "I'm not sure, sweetheart, that you'll see a ghost ship. I think it's probably just a legend. But there is something you might see that I needed to warn you about. Some people come to the cliff to throw themselves off the edge. That's the reason why we got the house at such a song, I'm afraid. Developers don't want to touch a property like that, no matter how prime the real estate might be, because it would burn a huge hole in their pockets. And you know how money-grabbing those kind of people are. They can't have that. Think about it, no one in their right mind would ever build a property on an Indian burial site, would they? Of course they've done it before, and will likely do it again. But everyone knows that that kind of thing does not bring in the buyers. People are naturally superstitious by nature." "Are you saying that people actually climb up the cliff to throw themselves over the sheer drop?" asked Hannah, raising a brow. "You're kidding, right?" "No, I'm sorry, sweetheart, I'm not. They do that. People who are very broken. They throw themselves over the cliff. And I'm worried that you might witness such an event. But it didn't stop us from buying the place. It's so beautiful. We just couldn't say no to the property." "But why do they want to kill themselves?" asked Hannah. "Do you know, you ask an excellent question, Hannah. I wish I knew the answer to it. We human beings are very complex, you know. Sometimes our frayed emotions can get the better of us. Life can be tough at the best of times. And when people are in grievous despair, they want a way out. And for some, climbing a cliff and falling to their death is a quick, very efficient way to go. It's a fast end, that is for sure." "That is gross," said Chester, pulling a disgusted face. "Ghost ships may be cool, and I agree with Hannah on that. But people committing suicide? No, that sucks. Why would you ever buy a house like that? Are you insane, Mum?" "Maybe I am," said Leonora. "I dare say there've been a lot of people like me wanting to buy the cliff house over the years, thinking they could overlook all the suicides they might unfortunately have to witness. And then they realise they just can't cope with all that tragedy. Then they sell up. So you're right, Chester. Maybe I will regret my decision. But what I will regret even more is missing out on trying to live in a spectacular place like that. I'll be always wondering, could I have made it work? You know your father is very good at talking to people. I think he might persuade some of those unfortunate people not to jump. And he's quite happy to help them like that, you know. When your father was in his early 20s, he helped in search and rescue with his own father. So I don't think a few lost souls climbing up the staircase to throw themselves off the cliff are an impossible feat for your father to save. He certainly wants to give it a go." "You think Dad could change their minds about jumping?" asked Hannah. "Yes, I do, Hannah. Your father is very good with people. If he can't talk anyone round, no one can. Your dad would make an excellent hostage negotiator. I've always said that." "Even if Dad stops those people from committing suicide, why would we want to live in a place like that?" asked Hannah. Leonora drew her 2 children lovingly into her arms and said, "Because, my love, we'll be on top of the world, and what is better than that?" It was when 16-year-old Hannah and 17-year-old Chester saw the cliff house for themselves for the very first time. That was when they comprehended implicitly why their parents could not turn down a bargain like this. The views everywhere were so prepossessing. If you climbed the steel staircase inlaid in the cliff, you could enjoy the benefits of a small rocky beach that was literally made up of sculptural rocks, and further inwards some of the treacherous rocks that peered through the ocean were like great big sea monsters. It was at high tide. The fierce frantic ocean, with its charging white horses that whipped against the rocks, was nothing short of marvellous to watch, and to listen to, of course. Better still when the tide was low. You could walk down the little rocky beach, along the long ribbons of beach sand, where you could meet other beach visitors, and 30 minutes along the way was a promenade, with quirky little shops and places to buy the world's best ice creams. If that wasn't cool enough, the cliff house boasted a plethora of Douglas fir trees clustered together around the perimeters of the property that stretched out into a woodland oasis. The yard was beautiful. The house was bright and cheery. Hannah doubted there would be any hauntings in a house like this. She had learned from her illustrious research that there should be a heaviness to a house, and the cliff house was both light and airy, so she was certain that there was no ghostly spectres walking around the place. But if you went out of the house at the dead of night, she shivered with delight at the prospect of actually seeing a ghost ship. When she told her best friend in Alabama, who was passionate about ghosts like she was, she could tell that Wendy Kudrow had been struck by the green-eyed monster. "You're kidding, right? You've got to be kidding! A ghost ship!" she had said. "That is super, super cool. You do know that legends aren't legends. My father told me that. Every story is born from a seed of truth, so those tales about the ghost ship are likely true. If I were you, I'd slip out of the house every night and watch and wait to see if you can see the ghost ship for yourself." "I want to," said Hannah. "I really do. The problem is Chester doesn't believe in ghosts. Well, not really, although he does like the sound of the ghost ship, but even that he doesn't believe. So I don't want to be standing on top of the cliff at the dead of night, do I? I don't want to be attempting to climb down that long staircase to the beach below. What if a gust of wind threw me off the edge to my death? Without any problems. It's a very sheer drop, you know. People come to the cliff house to commit suicide. They throw themselves off the edge of the cliff. That's why we got the place so cheaply." "You're kidding, right? Have you seen anyone trying to throw themselves off the cliff yet?" she asked, trying to stomach these startling revelations. "No, I haven't," said Hannah. "But I guess it's only a matter of time before I actually do." Little did Hannah know that the following evening she'd witness someone attempting to take their own life. At the time, Hannah had moaned, "Really, Mum? Please don't make me do the dishes tonight. Can't you do it for once?" "No, I can't, Hannah. You must do your chores," said Leonora stiffly. "But I want to watch something on Netflix," said Hannah, pulling a face. "Well, you can watch it later, can't you? Netflix can wait, Hannah, but the dishes can't." "You heard your mother, Hannah," said Malachi. "You go and do the dishes. It won't take you very long," he said, giving her an encouraging wink. Hannah trotted off reluctantly to the kitchen to do her parents' bidding. It was her turn to rinse the dishes off in the kitchen sink before she piled them into the dishwasher for them to receive a hot wash. It was an exceptionally light night. The full moon was so bright that she could see the details of the front yard very clearly, and that was when she discerned the ambiguous hooded figure walking up the wrought iron staircase to the top of the cliff. She guessed it was a woman, based on her narrow shoulders. The woman veered closer and closer towards the edge of the cliff. Hannah began to scream in her head. "Please stop! You're going to fall over if you get any closer." The plate in Hannah's hand had slipped through her fingers like butter and crashed on the floor. She cried out, "Dad! Dad! Quickly come! Come over here! There's someone on the edge of the cliff! I think they're going to fall." Hannah's father hurriedly ran to Hannah's side, glancing very quickly out of the kitchen window. "Oh, my God, Leonora! This is it! We've got our first jumper!" he cried out. "Hannah's right. Someone's going to throw themselves off the cliff. I've got to stop them. If that girl gets any closer to the edge, she'll fall over. She looks pretty determined by the looks of things, and there's quite a wind out there tonight. One gust of wind and she's over like a shot." "Good luck, sweetheart," came Leonora's voice. "I know you can do it, Malachi. You can talk that girl round." "Daddy, please don't let that poor girl jump to her death. You've got to stop her." "I'll do my best, Hannah," said Malachi, putting his parka coat on and then dashing outside the kitchen door, running towards the cliff. Leonora quickly phoned up the police to say there was someone on the cliff. "I'm phoning from the cliff house. Yes, that's right. We've got a jumper. Please be quick." Hannah was to learn quite a few things about her father, and her mother was absolutely right that Malachi was a natural at persuading people not to jump to their deaths, even though he was sometimes on the cliff for hours, trying to talk them round. It would seem that in the months that were to follow, Malachi had managed to stop over 9 people from committing suicide, which was miraculous. Furthermore, he'd invited them back to the cliff house for coffee. The police had lifted those people safely back to their homes and given them literature on how they could find help. They marvelled at how Malachi had managed to persuade them to walk away from the cliff and to prevent them from jumping to their deaths. "What do you say?" the officers had asked Malachi. "I tell them I've been at rock bottom myself, when I felt like they did, but I'm glad that I never ended my life, and I persuade them that they will be glad that they didn't either." This had come as a shock to Hannah. "You mean you wanted to end your life once, Dad?" she asked, horrified by this revelation. Her father was the most easy-going, untroubled person she knew. It seemed enigmatic that this great big lovable teddy bear she knew as her father could ever have been in such a low place in his life that he had considered taking his life. "Yes, I did, Hannah," said her father. "I was desperately sad. It happened soon after my brother was killed in a car accident. I survived that accident, and I was afflicted with much guilt. It's known as survivor's guilt, I believe. I got to a place where I was so desolate I wanted to end it all. But I persuaded myself that I should get through it, just for my brother. And I did. I guess I can identify with those people desiring to jump to their deaths. They want a quick ending to their lives, just like I did at the time. It made perfect sense to me. So I guess I can just identify with the way they feel." "So what do you actually say to them, Dad?" asked Hannah, intrigued. "Well, I tell the people that I encounter that life is like a ride, and we all have to face some tough rides from time to time. But eventually the storm dies, as it always does. Everything will settle down. Then you realize you're glad you're still here, because the bad weather has abated. The harrowing storm is over. It's past. I tell them that even if we hit rock bottom, we cannot fall any further once we're at the bottom. The only way is up. For a moment they consider what I say. Sometimes they're resistant to believe it can be true. They often say, 'It's too late. Nothing is ever going to get better for me.' I tell them, 'Well, you won't be around to find out, will you? Because once you've thrown yourself off the cliff, you've thrown away all your opportunities for a brighter future.' That gets them thinking most of the time." Many of the people that Malachi brought back to the cliff house were regular people who had allowed life to swallow them up whole. One woman discovered her husband had cheated on her and found she had nothing left to live for. Another man had high gambling debts and was scared of revealing to his family that he'd burnt through all their savings. Another man was suffering from a joyless life, feeling there was nothing left to live for. It would seem with each person, Malachi had talked them all around, although on one occasion a body the family had not seen was found lying deceased on the rocks below, and the whole area had been covered with crime scene tape, and was very grim. But this person had obviously committed suicide long after the Andersons had retired to bed, and so Malachi had never had the opportunity to talk them around. The police had aptly warned Malachi that there would invariably be people he might not be able to talk around from jumping to their deaths, and if that was to happen, he needed to let it go, or it would ultimately destroy him. Leonora loved living in the Cliff House, and in many ways the family was beginning to feel that they were meant to be there, as Malachi had helped stop so many people from ending their lives. Some of them, he said, just needed someone to listen to them, someone to understand their pain, and Malachi was ever willing to be that listening ear for them. It was on spring break when Hannah's very best friend, Wendy Kudrow, came to stay with the Anderson family. Wendy Kudrow was about as unconventional as you could get. She was the kind of person that shunned authority of any kind, and being told what to do by political leaders or by people in authority who claimed they knew what was best for humanity. If they knew what they were doing, America would be in a better place, wouldn't it? Wendy had told the Andersons. But it's going down the plug hole fast, due to abysmal leadership and leaders squandering our taxes for their own ends. We're the greatest country in the entire world, but our country is an absolute mess. It is such a shame. I mean, think about it. If you go to a hairdresser, she messes up your hair. You know you need to find a new hairdresser, don't you? It's common sense. Why on earth do we put up with our useless leaders? God only knows. We need fresh, new, innovative leadership in this country. Forget about political parties. None of that matters anymore. Who cares about that? We need a better America, and it's the people that can change this country, not these pretentious folk who think they've got all the answers. We need to stand together as a united force. A country divided against itself simply cannot stand. If I was a parrot, she told the Andersons, they'd have to shut me up, because I'd have quite the opinion about everything, and would freely express it too, in a world hell-bent on shutting us all up. That's what our leaders want to do. They want to shut us up so that we don't say anything, and they want to turn our attention to things that don't matter. I would literally fire all the presidents and send them packing with their tails between their legs for doing such a lousy job. You're very passionate about this, Wendy, I can see, said Malachi, and you make some valid points. Our country is in a dreadful mess. Everybody is aware of that now. And we definitely need some good leadership in this country. I just wish someone like you would get into power, because we'd have a better America, that's for sure. Thank you so much, Malachi. I'd like to be in leadership one day, just to correct the messes that we find ourselves in. Wendy Kudrow wore short red and black tartan skirts, long white socks, and her long blonde hair was pulled back in a lively pigtail. She was mischievous and rather rambunctious, like a Jack Russell Terrier, but her boundless enthusiasm was always infectious, and even Chester, who was rather inclined to take life too seriously, would find himself laughing at everything Wendy had to say. "Well, when you're around, Wendy," said Chester, "things always seem to happen." He was right, of course. When Wendy was around, things always did seem to happen. Wendy Kudrow completely understood why the Andersons had bought the Cliff House. In their shoes, she'd have done exactly the same, because the views were so beautiful, and she was stunned by how stunning they were. She did describe some of the houses on the mountain as being indulgent and over the top, but the Cliff House was modest and beautiful. "What do you think about the drop?" Chester had asked Wendy curiously. "The fact that people come here to commit suicide?" "Well, if you think about it, people are always going to use bridges and cliffs to commit suicide, and it is so tragic that lives are lost. But the fact that Malachi has saved so many people from making such a desperate decision means your living here is not a fluke. Maybe, Malachi, you're some kind of earth angel," she said. "I think you're right, Wendy," said Leonora. "I don't think our moving here was a mistake. It almost feels like a calling for Malachi. And when we moved here, it felt so right, as if in some way we belonged here. Even Hannah and Chester feel very much the same, don't you, dears?" she asked her children, who both nodded in agreement, between mouthfuls of steamy chicken casserole. So there we are. That's the end of part 2. Part 3 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.